Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2 3. 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Nothing.
Good morning, and welcome to this public meeting of the United States Consumer Product Safety Commission. We have one item on our agenda this morning, and that is a public hearing to receive information from interested parties about possible changes to CPSC's publicly available Consumer Product Safety Information Database, also known as www.SaferProducts.gov. I often say that CPSC's mission is aided by the input and the insight of our stakeholders, so I'm very grateful to all of today's presenters, as well as those who have submitted written testimony, and for taking the time and the effort to provide your input to us. It's very important. And I would just advise to anyone who wishes to comment, the comment period is open on the RFI until April 3rd of 2019. So I would encourage anyone else who would like to comment on our database to please submit your comments by the April 3rd date. It's been more than 10 years since CPSC was directed through the CPSIA to create this database, and technology has advanced dramatically in the last 10 years. And I think it's past time that we take a look at the ways SaferProducts.gov can be improved. CPSC's fiscal year 2019 operating plan directed staff to take a critical look at SaferProducts.gov to see what improvements may be necessary to make it more prominent, more functional, and more user-friendly. I want to acknowledge CPSC's staff members who are here this morning. And I'll start with Dr. Borlace, who is the head of the XHR, because it's his team. And then I see Steve Hanway here, who is the head of epidemiology. But Ian Elkin, he's upstairs. He is the project manager for this project. And so I want to recognize him as well as Meredith Kelch in the Office of General Counsel. And they will be leading this FY 2019 initiative. Thank you for being here this morning, to Dr. Borlace and to Mr. Hanway. I do want to just quickly provide you with an update on a related matter, because this is obviously related to the SaferProducts.gov database. During the government shutdown, CPSC received 547 reports to SaferProducts.gov. As with other information received during through the agency during the furlough, these reports were reviewed by the accepted staff to see if they met the agency's, quote, imminent threat threshold. And if they did not, they were flagged for follow-up when the government reopened. Although staff was unable to process the reports for publication to the website during the lapse in our funding and appropriations, I'm very pleased to announce this morning that staff has reviewed and published the appropriate reports. And so staff has caught up with any backlog that was created by the furlough, and any relevant and appropriate reports made through SaferProducts.gov have been posted to SaferProducts.gov. And I will take this opportunity to commend all staff for their work in helping the agency to catch up during the furloughed period of time and the backlog that was created by the furlough. So now on to this morning's business. We have one panel of presenters. Each presenter will have 10 minutes to deliver his or her comments. Our secretary, Ms. Alberta Mills, will track the time for all of us. I would ask the presenters to watch the lights in front of you to track your remaining time. The yellow lights indicate that you have 1 minute remaining. After the presentations by all panel members, the commissioners will have 5 minutes for each questions, and we can go multiple rounds if necessary. I also would like to note, before we get started, that Commissioner Kay is not here this morning and developed an unexpected conflict after this hearing was scheduled. He did ask me to tell you that he was summoned to the Hill and will return here to the hearing as soon as possible. So with that, we will begin with panelists, which include this morning Ms. Nancy Coles from Kids in Danger, Ms. Rachel Weintraub from Consumer Federation of America, and Mr. William Wallace from Consumers Union. Ms. Coles, if you would begin.
Thank you. And thank you to the Commission and the Chairman for having this hearing. Obviously, talk to you all, and I can only panel and wonder if they were right that Safer Products shut business down when it was implemented, because I don't see anyone here from the regulated industry, but we'll have plenty to say, and I'm sure they will as well. In 2008, as you mentioned, Congress passed and the President signed into law the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, which strengthened CPSC through granting new authority. The efforts of advocates and congressional leaders to pass an overwhelmingly bipartisan bill has paid off in lives saved, dangerous products removed.
Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, but it doesn't sound like your microphone is working properly. The red is on, but it doesn't sound like it's project.
Better? No?
Start again just as soon as Rock checked. Thank you, Dwayne.
And if we could make sure that her clock's reset.
And try again, see if, oh,
Hello?
here
Is that better?
here comes a new microphone.
Hello? It doesn't. Hello? Yeah? Okay. Ready?
Thank you. You may start again, and the clock will start all over again.
Should I start again or just
Go
pick
ahead.
up where I left off? Okay. SaferProducts.gov is one of the safety breakthroughs that came about due to the passage of the landmark CPSIA. Importantly, the database provides the ability to report and review incident reports involving consumer products. This has provided a new and important source of product safety information. SaferProducts.gov is a useful tool that can be made even more useful with key updates and upgrades. We are encouraged by this public hearing and urge the CPSC to continue to engage in an open and balanced process as it considers possible improvements that will result in a more user-friendly experience for both posting and reviewing incident reports and a more robust database to increase its usefulness. KID, along with Consumer Federation of America and others, have conducted reviews and reports on SaferProducts.gov. Our most recent was for the last year's 10th anniversary of the CPSIA. Our report focused on reports involving children 18 and younger to identify patterns in data and provide recommendations for expanding the reach of this important safety tool. Here's some of the findings of the report. 94% of the reports involved an incident, injury, or death, while fewer than 2% were concerns about products with no incidents. Almost half of the reports, 46%, involved an injury. Over half of all reports, 56%, were made for children under 3. Nursery products and toys comprised 59% of the report. Some manufacturers of children's and toddlers' products appear repeatedly in the list of incident reports. Most frequently named companies include Fisher-Price, mostly for the Rock and Play, Pampers for diapers, and Graco for a range of their nursery products. That is important to note since outside of SaferProducts.gov or recalls, CPSC provides very little brand or model-specific safety information. Alarmingly, the report also shows that between 2012, the first full year, and 2017, reports involving children and children's products per year have dropped by 62%. It is discouraging but not surprising that the number of reports have dropped. We see little effort to publicize the database. Most of the company comments on the site appear to discourage use of the database and suggest to the reports to the company instead, where it will not be made public even if they do report it to CPSC. The purpose of including the database in CPSIA was to get product safety information to consumers outside of the restrictive Section 6B rule that ties CPSC's hands when it comes to releasing hazard information. To truly serve consumers with a robust source of product safety information, the CPSC should increase the database's visibility and use. Here's our general recommendation, and then I'll respond to the specific questions that were asked in the notice. First, develop and implement a plan to increase awareness and use of the database by the public, as well as healthcare professionals and other permitted reporters, through a more consumer-friendly interface, as well as outreach and training. Market the site more widely, both to generate reports and allow consumers to research products. CPSC made a few great PSAs a few years ago, but the continuing effort to drive consumers to the site seems weak. SaferProducts.gov contains a great deal of data. CPSC could have a positive impact on injury prevention if it would release an annual report evaluating the trends in harm posed by products in the database. Reports on specific injury patterns or products generated from the data would be an excellent way for CPSC to highlight the database and provide useful information to consumers to keep children safe. While there's a field on each report on the database to link it to associated recalls, the recall information is rarely included, leaving consumers in the dark about their use of a recalled product. All reports associated with recalled products should include a link to the recall. This serves both the original poster and others who view it. This should be true even if the recall is for another reason than what the incident reported. It is another opportunity to reach consumers with recall information that CPSC is currently missing. In a quick study of reports currently on the database, involving either baby or children's products, including toys, we found that while the time stipulated in the Act is 5 business days to get the report to the manufacturer, and 10 days after, and a posting 10 days after that, a total of 15 working days, or about 3 weeks, we found that fewer than 0.5% of reports met that 15-day limit. 43% were posted within 20 days or a month. A few, 0.4%, took more than a year to post, and about 1% took more than 6 months. So most reports took somewhere between a month and 6 months to post. There's a lot of room for improvement there. CPSC needs to answer the questions that arise. What is the problem that keeps the agency from following the law, and how can that time be reduced so that most reports are posted within a month? And these are the reports that are eventually posted. It doesn't account for, or we have no way to track, those that are never posted. CPSC gets many reports from other sources that would greatly increase the usefulness of the database. Consider ways to get that information in the correct format and with the information needed to include it in the SaferProducts.gov database. As many as 50% of the reports are not included in the database for undisclosed reasons. CPSC should review these to determine ways to get more included. Sometimes it's because the consumer asks for it not to be posted. CPSC can do a better job of explaining the utility of publishing the reports to the consumers using the database so they understand the benefits of having the report published, as well as the fact that it will not include any of their personal information. Reports with required information missing may not be posted. CPSC should review the form to improve the quality of the reports filed by adding prompts or explanations and following up with consumers or other reporters to get the missing information. And if there are reports not making it into the public database for other reasons, CPSC should investigate that, since all reports are required to be posted if they meet the criteria. To answer some of your specific questions, how can the overall design of Safer Products be improved? Make it more prominent at CPSC's website. It is now very hard to find. There is no link to the site on the home page except for the little box that says Report a Safety Issue Here, and it does not even use the name SaferProducts.gov, losing another opportunity to build awareness of the site. The web page itself looks out of date. It's an older, narrower format than most websites, including CPSC's main website. It doesn't clearly state the purpose or mission of the database. Looking at other CPSC pages, including the home page, the atvsafety.gov page, or Pool Safely, none of these pages list SaferProducts.gov, while they can all be accessed from the database page. This is a missed opportunity to drive more traffic to the database. The site is also not mobile friendly, as you know. It displays a full web page that is virtually impossible to navigate on a phone screen. Unlike, again, CPSC's main page that has been formatted for use on a mobile device. One of the things I noticed how can the process of reporting be improved. Despite SaferProducts.gov being intentionally an online portal, if the consumer realizes they made a mistake, the FAQ requires that they mail in a correction to that. There's no way to do that online. again, so you're taking people off an online portal, requiring them to write and mail a letter to you to fix an issue with it. That simply slows down the process. I think that the page itself, the instructions can be improved by making it clear that reporting is a way to have the problem investigated, that their report is important, and that CPSC wants them to report, not just that CPSC is required to have this portal. Provide suggestions for where the required information can be found, packaging, the label on the product, the manufacturer website, and really to give them those added cues so that they have the information they need. The search function at SaferProducts.gov, I have to say, is better than the search function at CPSC.gov, but it still cannot always return valid results. For instance, on the home page, there's a search prompt to search for tip-overs. When we searched that, we found that the first report of a dresser or TV tip-over came at the end of page 4 of the search results, and that was about difficulty in participating in the IKEA recall. The first report of a tipping dresser came on page 6. So consumers might think there are just simply no tip-over incidents, and part of the problem is most of the reports were about losing a tip of your finger or cutting a tip of something else and not furniture tip-over. As I mentioned, I think associated recalls should be included. Encourage the inclusion of pictures of the product. I think that helps people to use it. And I'm running out of time. The other thing I have is I think that the agency should encourage use of the product as a research tool for consumers. Just like with Yelp, TripAdvisors, and other things, many people are users of the site for information before they might make their first review and report, and if more people used it for reviewing information, they'd be more likely to use it to make a report.
Thank you very much. Ms. Weintraub?
Thank you. Is this working? Great. Acting Chairman Burkle, Commissioners Adler, Bayoko, and Feldman, thank you for holding this hearing. We welcome the request by the CPSC for public input about possible improvements to SaferProducts.gov. We welcome the opportunity to share information about the strengths and potential improvements to this important database, and we very much appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm Rachel Weintraub, Legislative Director and General Counsel with Consumer Federation of America. CFA is an association of nearly 300 nonprofit consumer organizations across the United States. So the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, signed into law August of 2008, strengthened the authority of the CPSC. The law includes many vital improvements to our safety net, including directing the CPSC to create this database, SaferProducts.gov, where consumers can report and research safety hazards experienced with a wide variety of consumer products. While the CPSC has historically collected consumer complaints, most were hidden from the public for sometimes incredibly long periods of time or forever until and if a recall was announced. This meant that too often consumers were unwittingly using products that CPSC and manufacturers knew posed safety hazards. Too many consumers were told that their individual safety hazard was the only known hazard, while numerous hazards were actually known. Consumers were under a veil of ignorance about too many consumer product hazards. Section 6B of the Consumer Product Safety Act causes this lack of transparency because it requires the CPSC to essentially ask permission from manufacturers before it can communicate information about a product to the public. Before the CPSIA passed, consumers were only able to find information about a product if it were recalled. General safety information of non-recalled products because of 6B was not available. And of course, as you know, while 6B still exists, importantly, SaferProducts.gov is outside of the scope of Section 6B. SaferProducts.gov went live on March 11, 2011, and helps the CPSC to identify trends in product hazards and allows consumers and others, such as their physicians, to submit reports about a harm or risk of harm associated with a consumer product to the database. The database is also searchable, enabling research of product hazard reports. The CPSC database contains an array of protections to ensure that accuracy of information that inaccurate information does not get published. Anonymous reports are not permitted. Only safety-related information is permitted. Reports are only considered for publication if specific minimum fields are completed, and manufacturers have the opportunity to correct inaccurate information and to provide their own comments. If consumers experienced a risk of harm or an actual injury caused by a consumer product, they can now quickly and easily share that experience with the CPSC. Previously, consumers did not have this resource. This has been a considerable increase in transparency for consumer product safety. Numerous studies have analyzed SaferProducts.gov. In April 2012, 1 year after SaferProducts.gov went live, CFA and Kids in Danger released a study that found in the first 10 months of going live, there were over 6,000 reports filed. Consumers made up 97% of the reporters to the database. Manufacturers exercised their right to post additional comments on 53% of reports, and the information provided to the database is overwhelmingly specific, with 84% of all reports including a serial number or model name or number. In addition, the Government Accountability Office released a report, Awareness, Use, and Usefulness of SaferProducts.gov, in March 2013, that found that many consumers in GAO's usability tests thought the site generally was easy to use and had helpful information, but identified areas for improvement as well. GAO's suggestions for areas of improvement included establishing and incorporating metrics to assess efforts to increase awareness and use of SaferProducts.gov, looking for cost-effective ways of gathering additional data about site use, and implementing cost-effective usability improvements to the site. The CPSC has been responding to this GAO report for a period of time. The first two recommendations have been complied with and, according to GAO, are closed. The third recommendation, however, to improve the awareness, use, and usefulness of SaferProducts.gov and to implement cost-effective usability improvements taking into account the results of usability testing, is open and has not yet been fully resolved. While the CPSC just last August in 2018, in response to this recommendation by GAO, did make some changes, added the tagline, Report, Search, Protect to its website, the GAO indicated that the CPSC has still not explored the no-cost resources identified in GAO's report to assess website usability to further improve SaferProducts.gov. We urge the Commission to continue to work and fully address this recommendation, and on the other recommendations, we continue to urge the Commission to publish the number of annual visitors to SaferProducts.gov, for example, and to publicize its findings and the measures that the agency has used to improve the database. Further, and separately from GAO, CFA and Kids in Danger have conducted a more recent analysis. For example, we reviewed the number of reports included in the database, and while the size of the database has grown in recent years, the growth rate has been decreasing. From 2012, the first full year that SaferProducts.gov went online, to 2018, the number of reports posted to SaferProducts.gov has annually decreased 48%. This chart is in my submitted testimony as well. But really the question is, why is this happening? And we would welcome CPSC conducting this analysis and publishing its findings. We conducted another study during the summer of 2018 and looked at SaferProducts.gov data as of June 22nd, 2018. And based upon data reviewed as of that time, there were 36,544 reports. This built on a report that we originally did in 2016. To summarize, we found that reports of harm are concentrated among 10 manufacturers, that appliances make up a large percentage of reports among those 10 manufacturers. 30% of reports document some level of injury, and the percentage of reports with manufacturer comments on SaferProducts.gov now is less than half at 47%. So based on our analysis over the years and GAO's and others' analysis, we have a number of recommendations, all consistent with Nancy's, but so we focus a little bit on different things. So first, increase use. How can we how can we change this number? And also, how many visitors to SaferProducts.gov are there? I think this is a missing piece of data that would be very useful to have. We urge the agency to develop and implement a plan to increase awareness and use of the database by the public, as well as healthcare professionals and other permitted reporters through a more consumer-friendly interface, as well as outreach and training. We urge the agency to fold additional data sources into SaferProducts.gov, collect the information statutorily required for a report to be included in the database when collecting information, and consider what other publicly available sources of information could be included as well. Analyze data and release reports. SaferProducts.gov contains a great deal of very useful information. CPSC could have a positive impact on injury prevention if it would release its annual report evaluating the trends in harm posed by products in the database. Other reports on specific emerging hazards or items in the news could be conducted more regularly. We urge the agency to analyze why published reports are decreasing each year, publicize this analysis, and then publicize the steps that the CPSC will take to increase reporting. And if increased reporting does not occur, take additional steps to successfully increase reports. And then finally, we know that a large number of reports are not being published. We don't know why. We urge the CPSC to document and release to the public why this discrepancy exists. We thank you very much for your consideration. We look forward to working with the Commission to continue to improve this very important consumer resource. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wallace?
Thank you, Chairman Burkle, and thank you to the full Commission and staff for the chance to testify today on behalf of Consumer Reports, an independent nonprofit organization. We have retired the Consumers Union name. We're all Consumer Reports now. SaferProducts.gov is a useful tool. It can be improved, as my colleagues had mentioned, through key upgrades, particularly through an open process for feedback like this one. We support the CPSC's intention to evaluate the database and develop proposed enhancements. Here are our top priorities as the CPSC carries out that work. First, CPSC and all stakeholders should push to increase reports to SaferProducts.gov. The database is fundamentally sound, publicly available, searchable, online, accessible, as a product safety information database. Consumers and others are readily able to provide reports of harm related to the use of consumer products. The site is also useful, specific to consumer reports. It's useful to our safety research, journalism, and advocacy. And we understand that CPSC staff also use the reports and responses from companies in the database to help assess the risk of harm from a potential product hazard. At the same time, we're concerned that reports of harm received via SaferProducts.gov are an exceedingly small portion of the actual product hazard-related incidents that are out there. As discussed, there are far fewer reports in SaferProducts.gov than in other similar government databases that accept reports from consumers. Also, in just a back-of-the-envelope calculation based on CFA's and CPSC's data, the number of reports collected in the database in more than 7 years, including, of course, near misses, is just over half of the number of estimated emergency department treated injuries associated just with nursery products and just with children younger than age 5 just in the year 2016. Clearly there's room for improvement. We all should have a goal to capture as many reports of harm as we can that are eligible to be submitted to SaferProducts.gov. The CPSC should take steps to increase the use of the site by both consumers and others mentioned in statute as those expected to submit reports of harm. We note that the CPSC does a really good job making sure that its recall announcements include a reference to the website, to SaferProducts.gov. And several of our advocate partners also make sure to mention the database every chance they get when doing a media interview or otherwise making public comments. For our part, Consumer Reports has referenced SaferProducts.gov in more than 30 different online stories in just the last 24 months. On our website, cr.org, which receives an average of 15 million unique visitors every month. So we're trying to do our part as well. same time, more should be done. We recommend a significant increase in general marketing of SaferProducts.gov by the CPSC and additional funding for this activity from Congress. The CPSC and stakeholders should also pursue voluntary marketing of SaferProducts.gov by industries particularly represented in database reports, and explore opportunities for public service announcements. I understand some had been done previously, but there may be opportunities to partner on these kinds of announcements in a way that would help get them funded and get them out there on the airwaves. We also suggest special CPSC outreach to physicians, medical examiners, and first responders, as these sources could provide a wealth of information to help consumers' purchasing decisions and help researchers conduct more complete analyses. Second, CPSC should redesign and clean up parts of the website and ease the reporting process. The overall design of SaferProducts.gov can be improved in several ways to help make the site easier to use and more readily understandable by consumers and other potential submitters. In particular, we recommend making reporting links as prominent as possible, establishing greater integration between CPSC.gov and SaferProducts.gov, starting the reporting process immediately from the SaferProducts.gov homepage as opposed to, one click later. Designing an infographic to help consumers understand the reporting process better. We know there's a video, but we're thinking that in one glance it would be helpful if consumers could right away understand it. And it would also be helpful, if possible, to introduce automated texting or chat window capabilities to allow additional convenient ways for consumers to file reports. In addition, we suspect the SaferProducts.gov search results page can be unwieldy to many consumers and researchers. For search results, we recommend adding a higher level summary page of results with full results available to view or download. We also recommend routinely cleaning up the data to ensure proper spelling and categorization of companies and models, and producing results pages based on product classification that would more reliably reflect the product that is the subject of the search by a site user. This would go a long way toward enabling better analysis by safety researchers, including those in-house at CR. We support the CPSC's idea of creating a data visualization tool to help consumers and businesses better understand the data captured through SaferProducts.gov. But where possible, we would urge the agency to provide context in the tool on the severity of the hazard to consumers. With regard to easing the reporting process on SaferProducts.gov, we recommend that the CPSC add the capability to suggest, auto-populate, or auto-correct entries for items such as brands, models, injuries, and body parts involved. Codes from NICE for injuries and body parts could be a good resource for that information. Part. Such an improvement would make the data cleaner, enabling better understanding and analysis of the data by users. We also encourage optimization of SaferProducts.gov, as mentioned, for mobile devices, and a CPSC app that prioritizes reporting of harm in SaferProducts.gov in addition to providing information about recalls. Eventually, the app could include image recognition capability that would allow shoppers to take a picture of a product they are considering purchasing and receive information regarding recalls or reports for that product or a similar product from the same manufacturer. I know from an IT perspective this is sort of a holy grail, but we're dreaming big. Even in the absence of this capability, we suggest developing a simple, intuitive process for uploading photos that requires only one or two steps in order to help increase the number of photos associated with reports and therefore assist in identification of potentially hazardous products. Third, the CPSC should improve data source integration and public availability of reports. CPSC's data generally is high quality and includes many sources, but rarely is it presented to the public in a unified manner that draws on all relevant sources. It would be helpful for safety researchers for SaferProducts.gov data to be presented alongside other data sources to get a fuller and more complete picture of a hazard to consumers. For bulk data, it would be helpful for analysis to include associated photos or videos. Additionally, we support the development of robust artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities to help build a tool for identifying safety-related consumer feedback from online retail platforms and social media. This is a potentially powerful, untapped source of analysis that could be presented to SaferProducts.gov users beside information submitted to the database, and it's something I believe sister agencies may have some experience with and some guidance that could be helpful. We strongly urge the CPSC to review current practices and procedures to ensure that they promote maximum public availability of reports and follow statutory requirements applying to the timeliness of public disclosure of reports of harm submitted to SaferProducts.gov. We would be very concerned if a significant number of reports that users wish to be made public are being withheld or delayed from publication under conditions that are broader than those included in the statute. In response to CPSC's specific question about the checkbox allowing reporting users to consent to making their report public, because the reports the CPSC publishes are already prohibited by law from including personal information, we support the box being checked by default to help increase the number of published reports and increase awareness of potentially unsafe products. In advance of this change, we also urge the CPSC to collect and make public aggregate stats on reports from users that do not wish to have their exact report published. We suggest that this could be achieved and could provide useful safety information while maintaining privacy in keeping with the wishes of the report submitter. In conclusion, thank you very much for your consideration of our comments. We look forward to continuing to work together with the CPSC to develop and implement enhancements to SaferProducts.gov that would bolster product safety and help protect consumers, including by increasing reports of harm, taking steps to redesign and clean up parts of the website and ease the reporting process, and improving data source integration and the public availability of data. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for that very useful testimony and for the information you have provided for all of us. We'll now begin our 5-minute rounds of questions from the commissioners. And as I mentioned previously, if need be, we'll go several rounds. So I wanted to ask all three of you this question because I think in the 10 years since CPSIA and since the database was put in place, e-commerce has grown exponentially. And Will, you just ticked off technology, a whole list of technology that just didn't exist 10 years ago. And well, I'm sure my colleagues as well as I will get to that in a bit. But I just want to hear your opinions and then how you think we could use the advancement of e-commerce to help us here, because I think as e-commerce has grown, I'd like to hear your opinion. Is that a reason why the number of reports have declined? And if so, that's where I'd like you to start. But then beyond that, is there something we can do to improve the number of reports besides what we've talked about? And there's a whole lot of good ideas here in terms of marketing and PSAs and workshops and a whole host of things. But I'd like to hear your comments. Do you think even that e-commerce and the rise of e-commerce have affected the number of reports going into SaferProducts.gov? And just along those same lines, because if you purchase something online, you're intuitively you want to go back there if you're not happy with that product. So how do we get the consumer to be intuitive about SaferProducts.gov? So I realize that's a long question, and take your time. We have plenty of time. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. And I think that there are ways to incorporate it, such as Will suggested, actually using that data yourselves for part of the information that you're providing to the public or using for your own things, because people do talk about it there. I thought it was very interesting at ICFSA last week when Dr. Alsani from Johns Hopkins was talking about it, kind of different language that consumers use in their reports when they are reporting harm. It's much less, surprisingly, much less volatile, angry than when they, if your package is late, their response may be very angry, it didn't come, it was broken. But when they were talking about an injury, it was very matter of fact. I think contained some very good information. So I think that we should be looking for that data. I think that, CPSC works with these e-commerce companies in a variety of ways, whether it's through import surveillance or other things. It would be a simple matter to have a link to SaferProducts.gov on domain sites. It would be a way to direct consumers that if you have a safety issue with any product sold, let us know, but also report it here so that it can lead to an investigation and for other consumers to know about it. So I think that there are ways to interact, as you do on many other issues, with the e-commerce platforms that I would recommend pursuing.
So I agree. I think this is a great question. I don't know the answer. I've not come across any research, nor have we done specific research about the rise of e-commerce and consumers' then impact of their increased purchasing of products online and SaferProducts.gov. I would surmise, though, that perhaps it's actually the opposite, that as consumers are more comfortable purchasing products online, are more comfortable providing comments on those online websites, they would be more comfortable to report incidents of harm that they've occurred to SaferProducts.gov. I think that lack of familiarity that, in fact, may have existed to a larger degree when the database went live in 2011, there's no longer sort of that obstacle because consumers are so much more used to reading and taking into account and taking into perspective different online reviews. I do agree, though, that with the rise of online or e-commerce, that there could be a better integration of the database with the places where consumers actually purchase products. So creating partnerships with those online retailers and other entities, I think, would be a great advance. How I talk about SaferProducts.gov, I want SaferProducts.gov to be part of a new parent's checklist. Just as every new parent will lock cabinets, will think about how their baby, as they're becoming mobile, how they will baby-proof their home. I want SaferProducts.gov to be a part of their list, to be a part of what they look at when they're considering purchasing new products, especially at a time where developments in a child's life occur very quickly and they're purchasing products for different needs. But also, if they experience a harm with the product, that they know it's a place where they can report. We also, as Will mentioned, we mention SaferProducts.gov very often in almost every release that we put out. We talk about it very often. We do social media on SaferProducts.gov, but we have a long way to go to make this a household name, which is what we hope ultimately.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wallace, my time's up, but I will get back to you on the second round. Commissioner Adler.
Thank you very much. And I was just reflecting as I was listening to your testimony that if we had gone out and hired a consultant at many, many hundreds of thousands of dollars, I doubt that we would have gotten as useful advice as we've gotten from you. So thank you for your free labor and for assisting us. This is extraordinarily valuable. So at moments like this, I do occasionally reflect back on the history of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, especially the database. So I'd like to ask all of you one question. The Commission's been in existence for 40-plus years, and we still remain the only agency in the federal government that is subject to the kinds of information disclosure restrictions that are found in Section 6B. One of the rationales, only one of them, not the main rationale for the database, was that it would operate free, separate and apart from 6B. So I guess my question is, does the fact that the Commission has a public database that's not subject to 6B restrictions solve the problem of getting vital safety information to the public in light of Section 6B? And I invite anybody, I know Rachel and Nancy have been immersed in this a lot, but so has Will.
No, it does not.
Thank you. Okay, and I certainly agree. I also remember when the database was under consideration and we were drafting the rules, that one would have thought from the outcry from our friends in regulated industry and from some of my former colleagues on the Commission that the zombie apocalypse had arrived, that would be threatened by crazy, irresponsible consumers and wild trial lawyers submitting reams of frivolous data into the database. So I'm curious, have you noticed any abuses in the system that are evident to you from either irresponsible complaints being filed or from trial lawyers salting the database with frivolous complaints?
We have not. If anything, we think there's an underutilization of the appropriate reporters to the database, and ultimately, as we've discussed, a lack of awareness. Database.
I would also say, I think if that had been true, those regulated industries would be here today to tell you about it.
Yeah, well, what was fascinating is after a long, long period of bitter opposition, one of my colleagues, I think about a year later, was describing the database as a nothing burger. So somewhere between zombie apocalypse and nothing burger, I'm hopeful that we can make it into a safety burger. And I did also, I'm reflecting on the fact that a number of you have asked that we beef up our annual reports. To my surprise, when I asked to see our recent annual reports yesterday, it turns out, I think, that we haven't filed an annual report since about 2012, even though the statute clearly calls for us to file annual reports. But could you elaborate a little bit on what you would like to see put in these annual reports? Because I think that would be a terrific approach to sharing information about the database. In other words, you were talking about trends, and
Yeah.
I'm curious, trends.
Well, I think that, I use Safer Products all the time. I want to know about, if a parent calls me about a problem, I can almost always look and find a similar problem on Safer Products. That indicates to me it might be a trend. It's a wealth of information. I know that CPSC has been doing annual reports with NICE data and the other sources you have for death data, but I think that this is an area that would, provide just a snapshot of what injury patterns you're seeing that year, what kind of products. I think some of them obviously would correlate to some of the recalls that you're doing and some of the other safety messaging you're doing. I see it as a tool both to get out that information to the public about things they might not have thought of being a hazard when other people use them, but also it will increase the visibility of the database, that it is there, that it has data that can be used not only for individual consumers but for researchers. I think the more robust we can make it, the more reports that are in it. As Will said, it has a sliver of the injuries that are happening out there with product safety. It would be more and more useful. So I think that it's both a way to talk about current trends and issues, because I think they're going to change every year and it would be interesting, but also to draw attention to the database.
Alas, my time has expired.
Thank you, Commissioner Adler. Commissioner Biacco.
Thank you for doing our job. This has been very hard for me to listen to because I think that we have failed you and the consumer in the way our database functions. It was one of the very first things I mentioned when I walked through the door here on how important this is. And in my opinion, it's not that hard. There is no excuse for not having a user-friendly database. There's no excuse for not having a stronger marketing plan. Those are things that we all agree on. I'm not sure why we have been as ineffective as we have been. It is something that I talk about on a daily basis, and I don't think we need a public hearing for all of us to agree that there are very simple, basic ways to make this happen and make it happen fast, to make it happen effectively, and we agree, and as I listen to some of your comments on the obstacles such as 6B and other constraints that are statutorily imposed, I wish we could talk about those and how to get around them. But until we have an absolutely functional and useful and user-friendly database, we can't even get to those issues. So I have a lot of ideas, many of which you've named. I'm sure there are additional ideas. I know, Mr. Wallace, you brought up some things I hadn't thought of. Ms. Cowles, the comment about like how Yelp is used, fascinating. Somebody brought up, and I apologize, I don't remember who, about having a chat, being able to chat. You can do that anywhere. A lot of this technology is not difficult. So I will continue to push. I do think a lot of this stuff can be fixed without annual reports or analyses. Some of the analyses that you've done, thank you. I would like to talk to you further about them. I don't want to limit your time to 10 minutes. Come talk to me. And I will continue to walk down the hall and beg and plead and communicate that this needs to be changed. It needs to be changed now. We should be in a room with our team saying, make this better. How do we make this better? I know I had the same experience with the recall. It took 6 months to get it up, and it was basically a scrape of material that was already on our website. And then I think we could do better in promoting just our recall. I have a couple more ideas on that. This is not hard. And so I apologize to you that we have not done a better job, because I do think we failed you in that regard. So let's talk a little bit more. And I don't have any questions because I'm with you. I mean, there's some of, like I said, some of the areas that are statutorily, constraining, and as Commissioner Adler, I thought, raised a very good question about whether the database itself is being populated with skewed reports. I wish that was our only problem. We can get to that. There's safeguards that can be put in place. I do agree with you, Ms. Weintraub, that having parents, I think it's a wonderful idea. Why aren't we doing that? Telling parents, this is your checklist. Go check and make sure. And there are ways, of course there are ways, to work with e-commerce, retailers, to make a connection. And I've mentioned this to every retailer or e-commerce entity that's come into my office, and I can assure you they're willing to work with us. So let's make it happen. I'd like to see us talk a little less, do a little more. I'm working for you on this one, so I hope that I don't let you down. Try to get everybody on the same page. Thank you for your good work.
Thank you. Commissioner Biacco. Commissioner Feldman.
Thank you, and good morning. I want to begin by thanking the acting chairman for scheduling the hearing to examine the Commission's product safety information database, SaferProducts.gov. Today actually marks the first public hearing the Commission's held since I joined, so thank you for that. I think the work of the agency and our safety mission is too important for us to become a do-nothing agency. So I welcome you here today and hearing your comments on how we can improve generally and your thoughts on improvements to SaferProducts.gov specifically. We're here today to examine one of the key marketplace surveillance tools that the agency uses to hear directly from consumers, service providers, healthcare professionals, government officials, public safety entities about potentially harmful consumer products. As a threshold matter, as we've discussed today, the database is only as useful as consumers who know about it. In examining consumers' awareness of SaferProducts.gov, the Government Accountability Office found back in 2013 that none of the participants in the GAO-convened consumer focus group had heard of the website, and few had actually heard of CPSC itself. So I echo Ms. Weintraub's concerns that CPSC has not fully implemented GAO's recommendations here, including its recommendation that we improve the usefulness and awareness of the website. GAO recommended that CPSC implement cost-effective usability improvements, taking into account the results of existing testing. And while the agency has taken some steps to address that recommendation, it remains open, and clearly there's more work to be done. Madam Chair, with your permission, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that GAO study be entered into the record.
Without objection.
It's important that CPSC comply with the statutory directive underpinning the database. Section 212 of CPSIA directs the agency to establish and maintain the database, and this section includes specific direction with respect to how information is submitted and verified, how the database is to be organized, and for the correction of inaccurate information, among other things. I'm also mindful of the general duties that apply to the agency information security management, including those arising under PHMSA. The most recent report on CPSIA activity for fiscal 2018, our Inspector General contracted with a management consulting firm to perform a review of CPSC's compliance with FSMA and our FSMA reporting requirements for that fiscal year. His review found that CPSC was not compliant with all of FSMA's requirements and that the agency's noncompliance has, quote, a direct impact on the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of SaferProducts.gov. So, again, while the agency is making progress in implementing these requirements, the IG found 17 findings of noncompliance, supporting 52 recommendations to improve the agency's information security posture, all of which remain open. So I'd also like to ask unanimous consent that that 2018 report be included in the record. I'm also aware that 8 separate IG recommendations from a 2012 report remain open with respect to SaferProducts.gov. I'd like to ask unanimous consent that that 2012 report be included in the record. This is a high dollar and high visibility program that's specifically called out in statute, and simply put, we must do better. As we work to improve SaferProducts.gov, it's incumbent on us that we do so with an eye towards the agency's overall IT architecture, our security, and our technical competency at the agency. So it's my hope that we're going to work to close out these recommendations and raise awareness of the website to improve its usability. I have no further questions, but I would yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will continue my line of questioning, and I will go to Mr. Wallace to give you the opportunity to talk about e-commerce.
Great. Thank you for the question. It's a great question, and I appreciate the chance to address it. For your first question, this is just my opinion, but I would be, e-commerce certainly has grown dramatically since 2011. It was still pretty big in 2011, and so I would be doubtful that an increase in e-commerce would account for a decrease in reports to SaferProducts.gov. Just my opinion, though. In terms of how to improve the number of reports, I think that as my colleagues mentioned and as I mentioned in my testimony, there's a real opportunity here. There's a real opportunity for partnership coming at it from multiple directions. I think that there's an opportunity for partnership when it comes to simple consumer awareness of SaferProducts.gov, links to SaferProducts.gov, but I think there may also be, and I know that this would be a somewhat more difficult, but I think still eminently doable. I think that when you look to large e-commerce companies and the reviews that they receive, certainly everyone wants to foster their own website and their own community, but at the same time, when it comes to safety, everyone should be able to agree that those should be shared with the CPSA. And so if major e-commerce companies could set up some sort of system to get you comments from consumers or reviews from consumers that clearly identify a product safety issue, that would be huge. I know that that's something we at Consumer Reports have been doing with the CPSC for a little while, and I think there's a lot of potential to do some to improve sharing on that side of things.
Thank you very much. I wanted to just, because Ms. Coles, in your testimony, you talked about open, transparent, and the way forward. I know, Ms. Weintraub, you did as well, just in terms of how we go from here. And I would like to ask all three of you, how would you suggest that the agency go forward in this analysis and with improvements? How do we keep it open and transparent? How do we keep it balanced and address the concerns you've raised in your testimony? What would you like? How would you like to go from here?
One thing I want to say, which I think is only a partial answer to your question, is that some of the work the agency has done and some of the findings, I had a hard time finding. I didn't find on CPSC's website the communication and the changes that the agency has made in response to the GAO. I was only able to find that when I clicked through the GAO report and saw that the agency had made some changes and there was a correspondence in August of 2018, but I couldn't actually find that correspondence. So I think even the work that the agency is doing now in response, but not completed yet, but in response to the GAO, that should be easily available, and I wasn't able to find anything on the Commission's website about that. So I think in general, and to answer the question about what would be in an annual report, I think generally, what type of information does the CPSC have now? What is viewership like? Is that increasing? Is that decreasing? Is it consistent with the number of reports? Is it inconsistent with the number of reports? What really is the reason that there's a huge discrepancy between the number of reports filed and the number of reports published? Is it hard for consumers to complete it, as Nancy said, because if there's a mistake, they then need to mail it in? Are some of the questions hard for consumers to understand? Is the process so long that consumers don't ultimately complete the process? I feel like there's a lot of information that the agency has that we don't know that would be incredibly useful to know about the user experience. And I think that's something that with e-commerce, consumers have vastly more experience with e-commerce platforms and online interactions in general. So I think information like that, so we can conduct our analyses looking at the database itself, but sort of what goes on behind the curtain is information that we don't have that I think is very useful. It could be useful in us thinking about and making more recommendations and other academics who work in this field, but also I think it would be useful to see what other information exists, so we have a sense of the more broadly of what's going on with how consumers and others who are approved reporters for this system, how they have interacted with the database.
Thank you very much. My time's expired. Commissioner Adler.
Thank you very much, and I did want to make one quick observation. I believe that our database is more constrained in terms of what's permitted and what must be filed than any other database, and I keep coming back to the fact that the database should not be considered a court of law, and that was one of the big objections that was raised during the debate, is that the opponents of the database seem to think unless it would be admissible in a court of law, it shouldn't be permitted to be filed in the database, which then means people turn to Yelp and other much less formal structures for complaints, and we don't get the kind of information that we need, and we don't share it with the public. Mr. Wallace, when I was looking through the report that the consumer groups did about 5 years ago, and I hope I have this statistic right, or I'd love to hear that it's wrong, but comparing CPSC to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, am I right in saying that they got something like 600,000 complaints in roughly the same time frame where we got 29,000? Am I correct in stating that?
So my understanding is that that's correct. We at CR are standing on the shoulders of giants when it comes to CFA's analysis that was done here.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but it was, but that's
asking
my
the wrong
understanding,
person.
yeah.
Okay.
If I could, yes. So in that report, we looked at different agencies' databases, and CFPB at the time had over 600,000 reports. The CPSC had 29,000. The Department of Transportation Air Travel consumer reports, we couldn't get that number, but the Consumer Sentinel at the FTC, which is a long-established network, had over 12 million, and NHTSA Safer Car had over 1 million. So other databases, newer databases, have vastly larger numbers of reports, and there's a number of reasons. For CFPB, they did an extensive amount of marketing. They had a budget. They put it out there. You would see information about it. They did periodic reports of what the database found, looking at different trends, highlighting prominent areas. And also, of course, there's the issue of the impact of a financial harm versus a consumer harm, and people have different perceptions about that for sure. But I think the CFPB, what they did then when the database went live was really interesting and really impressive to look at how much effort they put into making their database a household name.
Yeah, I'm struck by, and again, I think this is correct, comparing us to NHTSA to me is actually a good comparison because we're both safety agencies dealing with products. NHTSA's database requirements are much, much less formal than our database is. And so as I understand it, during the government shutdown, NHTSA's database continued to publish reports. They have an automatic stripping of personally identifiable information, and otherwise what people complain about goes up on their database. And unfortunately, by sharp contrast, even though we did yeoman's work, our database was not operating. So one of the questions I think I would have is, have you studied what they call the abandonment rate? As I understand it, for each additional question that you ask people to fill out, you get a huge number of people who say, not worth it, I'm not going to do it. Would it make sense to make our database somewhat less complex and make it simpler for consumers to be able to file complaints? And I ask that generally of...
I would say yes. We don't have information about the abandonment rate. You do. So I think looking at that information, publicizing it, figuring out as much information as you can about it. But yes, I would say if we're not looking at changing the statute right now, but looking at what can be done within the statute and trying to decrease barriers to completion, absolutely.
Just one quick comment. I think the idea of giving reasons for why we don't publish reports is a superb idea, because I ask that when I talk to staff. And my understanding is a lot of the information that we get is information that under current database rules we could never publish. So we're always going to have a huge chunk of information that's not published, which is what causes me concerns. And I see I'm running out of time, so I will hold off further questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Biacco?
Thank you. So, Commissioner Adler, as always, you raise a very interesting point about the different people have different views on does it have to be admissible in a court of law. I do think it needs to be credible, but I think what you made me consider is maybe we're getting really bogged down in a lot of the details, and maybe there are ways to. We have SaferProducts.gov, right? SaferProducts.gov, and it has a particular statutory directive, and we should be functioning. Following that directive and making it user-friendly, marketing it, getting it out there. Those are things we can do. There are other ways to get information and reports out there. It doesn't have to fall under that umbrella. So I think that we ought to be looking at, we have this statutory charge. How do we make that as effective and user-friendly and well-known as possible, number one. Then we can talk about taking a deeper dive into some of the things you've raised. Number two, what else can we do? So, Mr. Wallace, I love your ideas on the e-commerce thing, but they're separate, right? And I have also ideas on, we don't need to use SaferProducts.gov to come up with ways we can work together with the industry or e-commerce or what. One of the things that I have in my mind that I'd like to see the agency do is get ahead of the curve on hazard identification. And this is speaking off the cuff, so consider that. But having been a litigator for 20 years, how we did discovery. You have key buzzwords. If fire or shock, or why don't we have a system that we share? Doesn't have to be, I don't mean the physical system, but why aren't we all using the same key buzzwords to identify a particular hazard? And then be able to say, hey, we're seeing this. Are you seeing this? And start investigating a little bit earlier rather than being reactive. There are lots of different ways that we can achieve the same result, which is finding the hazard, communicating it, hearing from the consumers, and capitalizing on that information. So I do hear what you're all saying. I think sometimes we get stuck in our own mud because we're trying to fit everything into the same place, and we get to arguing about things that we're not even there yet because nobody knows the SaferProducts.gov exists. So I think we need to start small, work big, but it can be done. Some of it is financially intensive, some of it is not. It does not cost anything these days to tweet out something and say, hey, SaferProducts.gov, or whatever the particular link or promotion is. So I do thank you again, and let's keep the dialogue open, keep pushing us. It needs to be fixed.
Thank you. Commissioner Feldman?
Thank you. I come to this agency with some background and familiarity with consumer reviews. On the Senate Commerce Committee, for instance, I worked on legislation, the Consumer Review Fairness Act, that preserves the ability of consumers to post honest but negative and critical reviews about product and services without fear of retribution or liquidated damages and the kinds of things that you actually saw in the marketplace being leveled to stifle those kinds of critical reviews. listening to the discussion today, I am wondering, and my question for the panel writ large is, how familiar are you with syndicated product review services? And is it your view whether that's something that makes sense to explore integration with the larger consumer products, SaferProducts.gov website? Nancy?
I'm not really familiar with them, and I would say that, one of the benefits, and to go back to Commissioner Bauco's point too, is not just to get safety information into CPSC where you can take action, but because of 6B and because you currently have a wealth of product safety information, hazard information that consumers have no way to access unless you get to the point of a recall, and that rarely happens. So we want you to have all the information. The hazard analysis, I think, is a great idea. The work at Virginia Tech, I think, has kind of modeled how that can be done. But the Safer Products is also to get information outside of 6B and to consumers. So if there's a different way to do it that meets the guidelines of Safer Product, and I think your point is well taken, there's nothing to stop CPSC from doing other types of databases that consumers have access to that aren't under the same restrictions. You can just have a big caveat on it of where it's from and how to take it. So I think there are additional ways to get more information, but our particular interest is making sure that it's consumer facing. Because whatever safety information is currently at CPSC or hazard identification, there's no way for us to know what happens to it.
Thank you. Rachel?
So I also don't know a lot about those syndicated comments. Did you use the word syndicated?
Syndicated Consumer Review Reporting Services.
Yeah, so I don't actually know a lot about them. I welcome learning more, but I think what all of this really teaches us is that there's a bizarre inverse reaction to more opportunities for consumers to share their experience, share what they like, share what they don't like about products, and yet for SaferProducts.gov, those numbers are going down. So I think really for the agency to get to the root at why that is, why are those types of services and comments, I mean, I don't know if there are more comments on certain online retailers than there used to be, but it seems like, again, I said this before, that consumers have a familiarity, they have a comfort level with reporting, and I guess also now with a lack of fear of retribution for negativity, though you still hear about it occasionally. But I think people are comfortable sharing their points of view, and I think consumers also have a sense of perspective, that they can get a sense of reading a review and how that would impact their use of a particular product and their decision to purchase. So I think what all of these things show is that with consumers interacting more online, that SaferProducts.gov should be seeing an increase, not a decrease.
The challenge is ongoing.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Wallace?
I too am not familiar, but I bet I have some colleagues who are, and I'll check on it.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you very much. I want to follow up on my last question just in terms of how you would like to see us go forward from here. What would be useful? What would maintain this open and transparent? Nancy, do you have any comments to add to what Rachel mentioned?
Yes, and I would, again, I think that the public hearing is a great place to start. I think there have been a few questions that we've raised in our testimony that would be helpful information, as Rachel said, in order to keep it an open process. So, Commissioner Adler, you mentioned that a lot of the reports that aren't filed are because they're missing information or they're not specific, and are there ways to get that information to clean those up? And is there some kind of reporting on, we hear from your staff and others, it's 50% of the reports that come in don't get published. And so that's a lot of reports, and they can't all be because they don't have the right information. I also had in my written testimony to look more, how you can bring those other reporters in and not just consumers. And that's going to be an additional problem too, because oftentimes they won't have that product level description that you might need, so how you would follow up on that. So I think to keep that information open, as Rachel said, to have the usage numbers out there. So whatever information you do have on consumer products, on SaferProducts.gov, remember this is the one thing that 6B can't touch, right? So whatever information you have on it, you are free to share with the public and share it, and we can use that to help give better advice on how to make improvements. Because this is what we do. We're all nonprofits. I spend every day trying to figure out how to reach more and more parents with our safety information. information. And so we do have ideas on it, we do have suggestions, but the more information we have, the more helpful we can be.
Mr. Wallace?
Thanks for the question. So as long as all of us, the Commission, all stakeholders can firmly agree on some principles for the database and on its fundamental usefulness to consumers, and can agree that we want to make it easier to use, we want to make it more widely used, we want to make it better. As long as we start from that place, I think that it would be really useful for the CPSC to put out a proposal for improving, put out a proposal for improving it, put out a plan, and everyone can weigh in a notice and comment type process with their views. And I think that taking that step, exercising that leadership, is going to be critical.
To that point, and to all three of you, so if something were put out, is it better to do it incrementally and say, okay, we're going to deal with this question right now? Why is usership going down, or why aren't more consumers turning to the database, to the use of the database? Do you see it would be better, more beneficial to do it incrementally, or just put together a plan, a total plan? You mentioned, and I guess one of my questions to all of you would be, because you've raised some good points, some helpful information that would help your inquiry and help your in getting that information. Is that something that would be useful before we even go forward, in answering some of those questions?
It seems to me like it would be very useful to have an overarching strategy, and then some short, medium, and long-term activities and objectives.
I would agree. My concern that sometimes one thing is done and then people could argue it's solved. And I think in this case, an incremental approach, I think it would make sense to have a larger sense of issues to be addressed and do them as what makes sense. But I think, I think just putting everything out incrementally could stifle the broader goals, and once that task is completed, I'd want to make sure that the momentum would continue. So I think there is wisdom to having a larger plan, but acknowledging that things could be achieved at different periods of time.
Thank you. Nancy?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And as to your question about the information, I think that figuring out the answers to some of the questions we've raised here is part of putting together that plan, because, so why do 50% not get posted? Why is there the lag that we noticed when there's a very strict law of how quickly that needs to be posted? And yet we see we see reports. And it could be you're getting more information, there could be logical information, reasons for all of it, but there's in the law how many days it should take, and very few meet that. So I think those are questions that would be helpful to maybe see where some of the problems with the process currently is. It's a big task, right? It involves all of your departments and from communications to figure out how to market it to compliance and the people actually running the database. So I think it will take a while, but I think getting something and getting input on things is a good thing.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Adler?
Thank you very much, and I keep thinking of this line that I've heard before, and that is safety information release delayed is often safety information denied, and people then suffer harm because they didn't have the information before them. And so the point you're making, and all of you were making this about the lag in releasing information, is something that puzzles me. In all honesty, I haven't had a chance to sit down and talk with staff and ask them what's going on, but I did reread the comments to our interpretive rule, and I do remember that several manufacturers said the time frames are too strict. Can't you come up with a relaxed approach to time frames? And boy, did we shoot that down. And I was reading, quote, "We are bound by the time frame set forth in Section 6AC3A of the CPSC." and do not have the authority to establish a different time frame. Under Section 6A of the CPSA, once we transmit a report of harm to a manufacturer or private labeler, we must publish the report of harm no later than the 10th business day after transmission, unless a determination of material inaccuracy has been made. Now, there may be some perfectly reasonable and human reasons why we are not meeting that, but I do promise you that after this meeting, I'm going to sit down with staff and talk over what the issues are about getting information out. Because the clock doesn't start once we receive a report. The clock starts once we've determined that it's an adequate report, and then we forward it to the manufacturer. So that is a point of concern. Another point you make, in picking up on what the chairman was saying about, do we adopt an incremental approach or do we adopt a cosmic approach? And I, as usual, don't know that they're mutually exclusive, but one of the things that I do when I read testimony from you is I try to see what life is like from your perspective. So I went back to our homepage and I said, now where am I going to find a link to reading reports in SaferProducts.gov? And there is no link. There's, I think, a fairly prominent link to filing a complaint, but if you don't want to necessarily file a complaint, you just want to read it the way you'd read an issue of Consumer Reports, I couldn't find it. Now, I may be missing that, but I do think if it's there, it's not prominent enough, and that would be something that would be a very small step that might produce some big results. So at this point, Mr. Wallace, I'm about to demonstrate my complete ignorance of some of the terminology that you were using, so if I might. One of the things that you said on page 3, you said that the Commission ought to introduce automated texting or chat window capabilities to enable filing of complaints. Could you expand on that a little bit and explain to those of us who are not quite so conversant with technology terms exactly what you mean? Is this something that Consumer Reports does itself, or is this something that you know other agencies do?
So it's not something that CR does, but we, what the idea is that, so, you know, as established by statute, there are the different pieces of information that a submitter must, that a user of the site must submit in order for the report to be accepted and get through. And they're pretty clearly laid out. It's a pretty linear process, and so what we're envisioning is that, you know, instead of or in addition to a multi-step form that consumers need to go through, where again you risk abandonment. Perhaps consumers who are more familiar with texting or more familiar with
unlike me,
immediate messaging online, maybe that would be a format that, although it collects the same information, it may be more convenient for them.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Ms. Weintraub, one of the questions that we asked in our, or anybody in our Federal Register notice seeking feedback was this option of a pre-check box where permission to publish the report of harm is granted automatically by the submitter unless he or she opts out of publication. I don't know how many of you read this delightful book called Nudge by Thaler and Sunstein, in which they say, let's apply some of the research from social science to make life better for people in a non-coercive but in a gently pushing way. This seems to me to be one of those instances where that kind of an approach might work. And so I'm wondering, can you think of a single reason why we should not do that? Maybe that's not the right way to ask that question anyway.
I would agree. I mean, I just think you need to be clear about what that means, and so the consumer knows what they're agreeing to, which I don't think that would be difficult in this context, but it's about transparency and opting in an informed way.
Yeah, because opt-in, opt-out can be abused, and so if we were to do that, we would certainly want to do it in a non-abusive manner. My time is up.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Biocco.
Thank you. I would like to just put a finer point on two very good points that both Commissioners Burkle and Adler raise, and that is, you know, you have to have plans, you have to have a proposal, and I think that's important. However, I do worry and I have experience since I've been here, that plans and proposals often get in the way of getting anything accomplished. So when Commissioner Adler says he wanted to look at our own website and he couldn't find a link, I don't think anybody would oppose or object to us not having a plan for making the link easier to find. So I think that's important, and to make those distinctions. I do agree with what Anne Marie said about having incremental steps, because they're easily to control and you can move the thing forward. If we get bogged down in a plan that we're waiting and then we have to vote on and then we have to take comments, again, we're going to find ourselves exactly where we are right now, and I'd hate to see that happen. So I do support having a plan. There's a lot of issues you've all raised today, a lot of issues to address, but let's do what we can do fast and effectively. That's as simple as making the link easily found if somebody wants to get to it, and moving that kind of stuff forward. That's, you know, as I was listening to them and their good points, I thought I wanted to call attention to.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Feldman?
Thank you. I have no further questions. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to begin my last round of questionings. And okay. I wanted to just follow up on Commissioner Adler's point, Mr. Wallace, and I apologize getting your name wrong. We do know it's Consumer Reports. Because he mentioned whether or not you use the technology, the texting and conversation technology. You also raised in your comments AI. Do you use AI at Consumer Reports?
We're working on it. It's something we've been investigating, but it's not something that we've rolled out.
Thank you. Commissioner, excuse me, Ms. Weintraub, in your, you look like you don't want to be up here. In your comments, and I thought this was interesting, and I want to ask the reasoning behind it, because you mentioned manufacturers' comments and including those, and I'd like to know how you think and why you think that would enhance the consumer's experience and enhance safety.
Well, so when the database was debated, when it was merely an idea, there was a lot of concern about manufacturers' ability to respond. So ultimately, obviously, like everything in life, this is a compromise, considering all the issues, and overwhelmingly it being outside of 6B was the only way it could work, and then there were other factors. So I think manufacturers' comments can be very helpful. They also can be somewhat limiting for consumers. So as Nancy mentioned, some of them seem to say, report to us, don't report here. I think different manufacturers have different strategies in terms of how they choose to respond. Some are very specific comments. Some are very general, saying, thank you, we're concerned about every report of harm, we are looking into this. And some are very specific about the particular use and whether they can or can't tell whether you know, from the incident, what it means about their product generally. So I think it's important, because I think every touch point between a consumer and a manufacturer, even through this sort of CPSC portal, is very important. We know from before the database was created that consumers would report incidents, and sometimes they were told their incident was the only incident that the manufacturer knew about. And that's incredibly isolating for a consumer. And especially later when we found out that actually they knew of hundreds of incidents. So I think that this type of information is incredibly important. I think it tells a lot about how the manufacturer approaches their relationship with the consumers who purchase their products, and I think ultimately it could be a very informative and helpful interaction between the consumer and the manufacturer, but sometimes it isn't. At the time, we thought it was important to note because it was an important issue of debate, and we wanted to see how it played out, how manufacturers used it, what consumer responses were.
Thank you very much. That ends my questions, Commissioner Adler.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I did want to underscore a point that Commissioner Biacco made about planning, because I think it's spot on, and I'm reminded of that great philosopher Mike Tyson, who once said, "Everybody has a plan until I punch him in the mouth," showing many a slip no, but there's many a slip twixt the cup and the lip when it comes to planning. But actually, I just had one final question, because in the very large amount and terrific amount of suggestions you've made, I'm wondering if you could give us your 1, 2, or 3 top priorities for action that the Commission ought to take, and that would be my final question. And again, I thank you all so much for superb performance and testimony.
Well, again, thank you guys for having us here and doing it. I think in terms of priorities, you know, it is the general priority is to get the database used, both for reporting and for reviewing, and anything that contributes to that would be a priority. I think secondly, it would be to make the process as quick and easy as possible for consumers, but also to make sure that we answer some of these questions we've raised about why recalls aren't included, why you know, some things aren't getting posted, so sort of more the behind-the-scene things.
Sorry. Number 1 priority, increase use. Number 2, and all of them are related to number 1, why? CPSC looking at the information you have, releasing it publicly and publicizing it. And 3, what else can the agency do built on that analysis, built on the information you have, whether you need more, get more, but take action, and concrete steps from the low-hanging fruit to putting SaferProducts.gov on the website immediately to things that could be more complicated.
What I'd say is, first, to raise awareness, specifically to, you know, my recommendation would be, you know, identify a targeted group of consumers that would be most likely to use the website and make sure that they're aware of it. A segment. Certainly there's broader marketing to be done, and that has been done, including in partnership, as we've suggested. But I think that getting the word out, you know, in getting the word out in a strategic manner is critical. When it comes to usability, I agree with with Commissioner Biacco and other commissioners who've said that that there are certain usability improvements that seem like no-brainers. That doesn't mean they don't cost money or they don't take time, but I think identifying those and getting those done is critical too. And then finally, if in any way the statute isn't being complied with, comply with the statute.
Thank you, Commissioner Adler. Commissioner Biacco?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Feldman?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Hearing no further questions, I know I speak for all of us up here at the dais when we extend to you our appreciation for you coming in, and as Commissioner Adler mentioned, for really providing us with some useful, helpful, practical information, and we really do appreciate your time here this morning. As a reminder, I want to just mention again that the time for comment on the RFI that is out there for SaferProducts.gov is April 3rd, 2019, and I would encourage any of our stakeholders to please comment and offer your suggestions on how we can make Safer Products more consumer-friendly and more useful. I also want to acknowledge for the record that we did receive additional written comments for today's hearing from Public Citizen, and I just want to acknowledge their testimony has been received and it will be entered into our record. And finally, as always, I want to thank our Executive Director and her staff, the Office of the Secretary, Office of the Facilities, General Counsel, and Rock Grant from Communications for their work. It's always a team effort to make these hearings, these public hearings, happen and to run smoothly. And Nancy, I want to apologize for your microphone not functioning, and thanks to Rock for getting it back up and running. Again, thank you to our panelists for being here, for your testimony today. And for everyone here who is in attendance or watching online this morning, I think we've heard some very valuable information and testimony of the agency. We look forward to going forth from here and incorporating some of that into a plan that will address some of these concerns and these issues. So thank you all very much, and that concludes the Consumer Product Safety Commission meeting.